I'm Dave Champion. I want to discuss with you some new study data results that dramatically changes the picture of COVID-19, not just in the United States, but in the world. But the change in the picture it paints is off the charts, stunning and dramatic. So stay with me. The data I'm talking about comes from antibody testing. Now, 4 different studies. Okay, so the first one was Germany, the second one was Iceland, the third one was Santa Clara County, California, and the fourth one being Los Angeles County, California. There are certain people I've noticed that really don't want the COVID-19 narrative to change. They want it to be, like as bad as nuclear war. And so as these studies have been released, that ilk has always tried to find some justification to dismiss them. Okay, so now we have 4. So if you're one of those people who are constantly trying to dismiss this stuff, just stop, okay? Because the results from all 4 say the same thing, and they are from different spots throughout the world. The idea that you can dismiss all 4 of them is absurd. This has only been going on months, right? So we don't have long-term clinical trials with evaluation. Okay, it doesn't exist. So you run with the evidence you have. And in this case, we're running with the data from 4 antibody studies from 4 different places on the planet. They all say essentially the same thing. The first antibody study results was from a region in Germany, and there researchers determined that 15% of the German citizens in that region had already had and recovered, even if they didn't know it, they were asymptomatic, which the vast majority of them were. They had already recovered, 15%. So to give you an idea of how dramatic that number is, if you take the official number from the German government from that region, how many people the German government said have or had COVID-19, the actual number based on the antibody test results was a 74-fold increase from the government numbers. The second such study was done in Iceland, and it produced a 50-fold increase from the numbers that the government knew about or was talking about or publishing. The third such research paper released was out of Santa Clara County, California. They gave a range of between 50-fold to 85-fold. And the latest one out of Los Angeles County, performed by the Los Angeles County Health Department and the University of Southern California, USC, shows a 55-fold increase from the numbers provided by the government. So these are some pretty startling distinctions, right? 50-fold, 60-fold, 85-fold. Why is there such a dramatic distinction between the numbers that the government, if you look at a government website and here's the current numbers for today, why are the numbers so different than what these antibody test results are indicating to us? The reason is, and I'm not blaming the government for this, it simply is what it is. The only cases the government can track are the ones where people have gone to a hospital or to some sort of a medical clinic, and a doctor has pronounced, "I hereby say you have COVID-19." And by the way, even those numbers are probably inflated, because back on the 24th of March, the CDC issued an order saying that doctors are to pronounce the death on the death certificate as COVID-19 if it was only a contributing factor or the physician was making an assumption that it was COVID-19 related. Nevertheless, the trivialities notwithstanding, the government numbers reflect only those cases of people who have come in for some sort of medical care and been diagnosed. What these antibody studies are showing us is that the vast majority of people who get the COVID-19 infection are asymptomatic, with a small percentage perhaps being minimally symptomatic. But the lion's share, they're asymptomatic. So what do we do with all these numbers, this, 50-fold or 70-fold or 85-fold? What do we do with all these numbers? Well, I'm just going to kind of do a rough average, and we'll just work with the figure 60-fold. If we take the official United States government numbers, which I checked just before I came and sat down here, the government says there are 806,000 total cases in the United States. So if we take that 60-fold, that means We're at essentially 44 million people who have already been infected with COVID-19. That's a huge difference, and it has serious implications for how we look at this. Of the several aspects that this new data changes for how we have to look at COVID-19, let's start with the mortality rate. If you take the official government numbers today, the number of people who died versus the total cases, the mortality rate for COVID-19 is 5.4%, which is not great, right? But we've already discussed these government numbers are nowhere near accurate. So that 5.4% obviously is not accurate either. So if we take the number of deaths, which is presumed to be accurate, it might be somewhat inflated in the sense that some of those people did not actually die of COVID-19. It was just assumed as per the CDC directive. Nevertheless, we're at about 42,000 deaths as I'm doing this. If we take the new data from the antibody testing, we take that 60-fold number and we take the number of total cases that the government says exist, and we increase that by 60-fold. And then we figure the mortality rate. The mortality rate with adjusted to reflect the principles that the data illustrates, the mortality rate is 9/100ths of 1%. That is worlds away from 5.4%. And it changes a lot of other dynamics we need to look at as well. How do these new numbers affect the government's authority to act in the way it has been acting? I think it basically eviscerates that. Now, let me explain why. These things are going to work their way through court. These stay-at-home orders and these business shutdowns, people are going to sue. They're going to want damages. They're going to go to court, and courts are going to have to evaluate this. One superstar attorney, Mark Garagos in Los Angeles, has already filed 5 lawsuits. So this is going to be adjudicated by the courts. So if you have a death rate of 5.4%, might a court say that the measures that these various governors have taken is justified, that the infringements on personal liberty were justified in the face of a 5.4% mortality rate? I think not. I think the courts will rule against that anyway, notwithstanding the argument I'm about to make, simply because there's no particularized information. They're not saying, we know you have the virus, so you're getting isolated. And we know you were in contact with somebody who has the virus, so you're getting quarantined. That's not what they're doing. They're just saying, hey, all of society, do what we say or else you're going to jail. Okay, with no particularized information. I don't believe the courts are going to uphold that. That said, let's say for the sake of argument that the courts would uphold that. Clearly, the court is going to look at a 5.4% mortality rate, hugely different than if the real mortality rate is 9/100ths of 1%. If we take a look at the 2017-2018 flu season, the death rate for the flu, when we look at the total estimated number of cases and the total estimated number of deaths, was also 9/100ths of 1%. So if these governors imagine that a court is going to uphold this, what they're really saying is, I expect the court to agree that I can order people, everybody, to stay home. I can shutter virtually all of the businesses basically anytime I want, like next flu season. All I can say is what's anticipated is going to have the same mortality rate as the flu in 2017, 2018, that season. So I can shut everything down now because they're the same mortality rates once we adjust the figures for the data. I don't think the courts are going to agree that any governor, that any state, that any legislature has that authority constitutionally. I think that the courts are just going to look and say, no. In a true disaster, yeah, okay, but 9/100ths of 1% is not a disaster. Now let me address the people that are going to try and criticize what I just said, because their argument I've seen for, you can't compare it to the flu season. The flu season is all year, and this has only been several months. Okay, stop. You don't know what you're talking about. The official flu season numbers are taken from a 19-week period. period. It's not taken from all year. 19 weeks. Now, how long has COVID-19 been with us? Well, it depends. If you believe the government, it's been 14 weeks. If you believe the testimony of people who say back in, and this is quite a few people, I mean, this isn't just anecdotal one or two people, this is tons of people who said that they had an illness back in December that manifested with the exact symptoms of COVID-19. It could have been here as early as December. There's a whole bunch of stuff going back to the U.S. intelligence community issuing a warning in November about China's situation. So there's a whole, but the bottom line is, if you believe it was here in December, then we're at like 20 weeks. And if you believe the government's narrative that the first case was recorded in the United States on January 19th, then we're at 14 weeks. Either way, we're still in the ballpark, so just don't. Another area where this new data changes or should change our perspective is on the issue of herd immunity. So if you believe or believed the government that there's only 806,000 cases, then clearly, I mean, reaching herd immunity would be quite a battle, right? But that's not true. So if we use, again, the number of 44 million, which the 60-fold increase beyond the official numbers validates, then you're much closer, because the number, and this is not precise, I'm going to explain that in a minute. The number we'd have to hit is 230 million. Well, we're already at 44 million, so we're on the way. So why do I say that that number 230 million is not precise? Well, again, because you've got all these people who want to niggle over the fine little details rather than looking at the big picture and making decisions based on the data we have. So people will tell you, well, you know, to hit herd immunity, it's got to be 67% or 83% or 91%. These people have no idea what they're talking about, because whatever the percentage is for herd immunity changes with each virus and that particular virus's dynamics. There is no one set figure. However, when you do your research, most immunologists, most experts in infectious disease, most frequently, not exclusively, most frequently use the figure of 70%. So I'm going to use that. Run with it. Take the big illustration. Stop niggling over the details. Okay, so that would 70% of the population would be 230 million people. We're already at 44 million. So how do we get there? Well, that's simple. With a virus that the vast majority of people, probably 97, 98% of the people, are asymptomatic. So they don't even know they have it. They spread it really quick, right? So all that needs to happen is government needs to get the hell out of the way. Stop with the stay-at-home order. Stop with the business shutdowns. Let Americans go back to the way they were living before. And lickety-split, within several weeks, we'll be at 230 million. We'll achieve herd immunity. And this virus event ends. That's what herd immunity does. It ends the event. Okay? And people are going to be saying to me now, I know I can hear this screaming, whining now. Oh, but you don't care about the people that are high risk. Okay, so I do. But the people who are high risk, when we look at the figure that we're already close to 44 million Americans, the people who are at high risk, I mean, we're not seeing them dropping dead in these tremendous numbers, okay? So, I mean, the numbers are big, don't get me wrong, but not like these people want us to believe, like, you know, the panic like this is nuclear war. In order to hit herd immunity, we basically need to get on with life, and the high-risk people need to accept self-responsibility for protecting themselves, whatever that means to them. Quarantining, always wearing gloves and masks, and understanding cross-contamination, because most people who are wearing gloves and masks don't, so the gloves and masks are utterly worthless. Nevertheless, what we need to do is a public health campaign about high-risk people. Here, if you're high risk, here's what you need to do. And then let the rest of the nation get on with their business, hit that herd immunity percentage, whatever it is. And the event, that is Mother Nature's off switch for a contagious event, is herd immunity. So let's talk about the ugly side of this whole thing. If we go to 230 million people having COVID-19, the death toll will be somewhere in the range of 160,000 people. That's a lot of dead people, okay? However, and this is the part I think a lot of Americans don't understand, whether we end this with herd immunity in several weeks, or we end this by finally reaching herd immunity a year from now, either way, 160,000 people are going to die. There's no out on that. There's no magic way to make a contagion stop killing that percentage of people that it will kill. In this case, 9/100ths of 1%. There's no way to stop it. What people don't understand, here's the way I try and express it to them. If by government action we can suppress the spread of the contagion by, say, 20%, we add 20% to the duration of the contagion. Okay? More to the point, perhaps, these stay-at-home orders and business shutdowns, they're meaningless because the vast majority of infections are asymptomatic. If we come out of the stay-at-home orders, we come out of the business shutdown, and even one person still has COVID-19, we're going to be back to the day that the government claims was January 19th. We had that very first case that nobody knew about until it was diagnosed on the 19th. Okay? And all we're going to do is, if we say that we started, for the sake of argument, in December, we started arcing up, okay, the first recognized case on December 19th. Okay, so then we do all these stay-at-home orders and business closures. Then we lift them, and even one person has COVID-19. That same arc repeats itself because you cannot stop a virus when the vast majority of people that get infected are asymptomatic. It is an absolute impossibility, and your good intentions and the fact that this is the 21st century and we should be able to, we can't get that through your head. 160,000 people are going to die. Period. The question is, are we going to get this over within several weeks and hit herd immunity and still have a country, still have an economy? Or are we going to do this repeat scenario again and again and again? We have the stay-at-home orders, we have the business closures, then they're lifted, and people still have COVID-19. So the arc starts, oh my God, it's getting out of control. We need business shutdowns and stay-at-home orders. Whoo, we saved ourselves. Okay, so then we do that for another month or 5 or 6 weeks. And then we lift it again. And some people still have COVID-19. And because it's spread primarily asymptomatically, that arc starts again. And then the government officials say, oh my God, third time we need stay-home orders and business shutdown orders. And believe me, government officials are not going to get that it was futile in the first place, so it's going to be futile in the second instance, and it's going to be futile in the third instance. They're not going to get that. That's not how government idiots function. Only because I know someone is going to bring it up in a comment, let me address vaccines. Okay, now first of all, I do not want to get into the pro or anti-vaccine argument. Okay, if you think that vaccines are nonsense and do not work, cool. If you think they're great and they do work, cool. And guess what? No matter how you think about that, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. Because in terms of dealing with COVID-19, there's going to be no vaccine within any time frame that matters. And possibly, depending on circumstances, never a vaccine. But even if it is developed, it's going to be way after we've either reached herd immunity and moved on, or we've strung this thing on for a year with these constant cycles of business shutdowns and stay-at-home orders, and we've destroyed our economy. I also want to talk about destroying our economy, because that's really the two choices. We get this done in several weeks and we're back on track, or we string it out over a year or more and we destroy our economy in the process. For those of you who think that you're being compassionate by stretching this whole thing out, you're not. First of all, 160,000 people are going to die, whether it's several weeks or several months. They're still going to die. But if we string it out for a year, hell, if we even string it out for a couple more months, we're going to be living in poverty for years, probably a decade. And if you do your research, which I know the people who are emotionally driven don't like research, but if you do your research, you will find a ton more people die from poverty than this virus could even think about. So you string it along, you destroy the economy, and you plunge 330 million people into poverty for years. And the same number of people die no matter which way you do it. Am I being dismissive of the loss of 160,000 Americans? No. To state a reality is not to be dismissive or lack empathy or compassion. Okay? To state what we can anticipate is the statistical reality is just that. I would feel, as in feeling empathy and compassion, for the families of all those 160,000 people. But there's no path open to us that's going to save them. Okay? So that's the important thing to understand. Empathy and compassion has its place. Making hard decisions when there is no good answer is what's on the table right now. And here are the choices. We move government out of the way. We get back to work. We open the businesses. We get back to living life as we used to. And by the way, we don't want to do any more social distancing because that's going to slow the hitting the mark for herd immunity. Okay? We want to get back to life as usual. And we need to have an education campaign on every airwave, on every radio show, on all the internet. We need to have an education campaign on speaking to high-risk people about how they can protect themselves while we intentionally go for herd immunity, which we can achieve in an infection that runs about 98% asymptomatic. We can hit that 230 million mark in several weeks, and Mother Nature will hit the off switch, and we're done with this, and we still have an economy. That's option one. Option two is we side with the illogical, non-data supported emotional narrative that we have to slow this down and drag those 160,000 deaths over a year, and in the process utterly destroy the U.S. economy and cause many more people to die from poverty than would have died from the disease. Those are the two decisions from which to choose. There is no third. Choose wisely.